So the Las Vegas Raiders have officially agreed to a trade for Davante Adams with the New York Jets. And the Raiders are now past the entire Davante Adams drama that kind of unfolded over the past 2 weeks. Davante Adams will officially now join the New York Jets. He's apparently already been in the building with the Jets as of this morning. And the updated compensation is also kind of known at this point. Early on, it was being reported that maybe it's like a 4th or 5th round pick. But the official terms is basically the Raiders will end up with a 3rd round pick. And at best, that could be a 2nd round pick, right? So it's essentially a conditional 3rd round pick. And the conditions around that pick are strictly based off of individual performances of Davante Adams. So if Adams, let's say, averages 70 yards per game for the rest of this season, the Raiders will end up with a 2nd round pick. Now, one of the things to note with this pick is if it does end up being a 2nd round pick for the Raiders, depending on where the Jets end up finishing at the end of this season, that could easily be a high 2nd round pick. All right, the Jets right now are 2-4. They're literally tied with the Raiders in terms of their record, which means that 2nd round pick could end up being a top 10 2nd round pick. Now, of course, that's probably not the expectations that most of us have for that pick. I think the Jets will end up making the playoffs, so it'll most likely be a bottom 10 pick in the 2nd round. But regardless of that, I think for the Raiders, it's a win-win. Not only do you move off of Davante Adams, but the biggest value for the Raiders in this is going to end up being that cap space, right? So the Raiders are going to end up saving a ton of cap from this trade, essentially. And here's the breakdown. So, of course, the Jets are going to get Davante Adams, but they will also have to end up inheriting almost $12 million in 2024, and they'll inherit $36 million in both 2025 and 2026, right? So the Raiders will essentially be able to get out of essentially a big chunk of that contract, which, to be honest, in 2025, 2026, it didn't really matter because the Raiders could have gotten out of that anyways. But the big part of it is the cap space we saved this year, right? So essentially, we're going to end up incurring just a $13 million dead cap hit for Davante Adams this year. Essentially, that's basically paying him for, up to this point, everything that we've kind of had for Davante. And the $15 million will obviously be next year as well, right? So you see in 2025, we'll have a $15 million dead cap hit for Davante Adams. That $15 million is because of the fact that the cap hits in Davante Adams' first 2 years were pretty low relative to the average he was supposed to get, right? So the Raiders get out of the contract with Davante. They're going to get a conditional 3rd round pick, potentially a 2nd. I think it's a perfect trade for the Raiders, right? Because this makes the Raiders a team that, let's be honest, we don't really know where this team's going to end up this year. We don't know if we're going to be a playoff team. And with Davante Adams specifically, I feel like it made sense for the Raiders because with a guy like Davante, he has maybe a year left in his career, maybe 2. And he's already, we already see he's already digressing in his NFL career, right? We are already seeing it. The guy had a lot of drops this season, right? He had key drops. Right, in 3 separate games, he had 3 separate drops that could have potentially changed those games. We saw that he's not really putting the effort into run blocking. And, the run blocking effort's one thing, right? Davante run blocking, and I get it. You don't really want this guy to run block. But I think for the Raiders, it just made a lot of sense, right? Davante's a guy that if you're going to be 100% competing for a Super Bowl, you want to bring him in. And, looking back at that trade, the Raiders essentially got 2.5 years for Davante Adams. They traded a 1st and a 2nd round pick. The Packers took that 1st round pick that the Raiders gave them, and they ended up drafting Quay Walker with that pick, right? Linebacker Quay Walker, he's a pretty good linebacker. And then with the 2nd round pick, they traded up and they ended up getting Christian Watson. So those are the 2 guys that the Raiders' picks were essentially used for. And another thing with that pick is, the Raiders did get, 2 good years out of Davante Adams, right? There were years that the Raiders wanted to try to go in and have success. There are 2 years in which the Raiders plan to potentially compete, right? Especially back in 2022, right? The first year Josh McDaniels was here. That was a year that the Raiders wanted to essentially go all in and try to compete and try to win and try to make the playoffs. So, that was essentially Derek Carr's final year here. You gave him the weapons he needed, right? You gave him Davante and Waller and all those other guys that essentially we had that year. It didn't work out. We kind of started like a mini rebuild last year, and I think now we're at the point where we really got to figure out where the Raiders go from here, right? You have a new coach. Some people that I've spoken to that have legit inside information do think that Antonio Pierce will be here next year. So from this point forward, I will go with the idea that I think AP will end up being here next year. And I don't necessarily agree with it, to be honest. I don't personally think the Raiders should keep AP past this year. But some people do think he'll actually be here with the Raiders. Obviously, moving off of Davante made sense. Here's another great part for the Raiders, right? Going into next year, we're going to have $108 million in cap space. $108 million. That's the fifth most cap space going into the 2025 season. Think about what the Raiders currently have on the books right now, right? So you have essentially $108 million in cap space. You already have Christian Wilkins under contract. You have Maxx Crosby under contract. You have Colton Miller, Jacoby Myers, right? Those are good pieces to have as you kind of go forward. And you will have to pay some guys, right? Like that $108 million that the Raiders have. Part of that's going to get used for guys like Malcolm Koonce, Nate Hobbs, Trayvon Merrick, Divine Diablo. If you want to continue to have the success that we've had on the defensive side, you got to bring those guys back. And I think for the Raiders, it just makes a ton of sense, right? Bring all of those guys back, re-sign every single one of the players that you've kind of homegrown yourself, and, continue to add pieces, right? There's nothing that says the Raiders can't add Malachi Starks in the draft this upcoming year, and you get the best defensive player coming out. There's nothing that's saying the Raiders can't go out and draft Calvin Banks to play right tackle, right? If DJ Glaze doesn't, if you don't see the upside with him, go with Calvin Banks. There's nothing that says the Raiders can't continue to get better and continue to add. And with $108 million, there's so much cap space, you can basically retain your guys and just continue to add on top of that, right? Now, I'll be the first to tell you guys, I don't personally think it's smart value to go out and pay a ton of, pay money to free agents, right? I don't think that's the best value with your money. Christian Wilkins made sense because he was a top 5 defensive tackle, and we needed a defensive tackle at that time. I think that made a ton of sense. But generally speaking, I don't think paying guys like, Corey Littleton and those type of guys, it doesn't make a ton of sense in my personal opinion. But I do like the fact that we have a ton of cap space because it does allow us to do different things with the Raiders roster. Now, of course, everybody's going to talk about the Raiders having to go out there and get a quarterback. That'll be the key part of this, right? The Raiders got to figure out the quarterback position. We got to figure out the offensive line, right? We need to really make sure we have a right tackle of the future. And then even more than that, we need to figure out the guard and center position, right? The right guard center position. I don't think Andre James is any good, to be honest. This year, the guy has well over 40 losing snaps. So to me, you can't have that guy as your starting center. So there's just little things the Raiders have to clean up with this roster. But Davante Adams will obviously not be a part of that. And I think it's the best case scenario for the Raiders. And even for Davante himself, I know a lot of fans are upset that Davante Adams ended up essentially requesting a trade and wanting to leave the Las Vegas Raiders after he had told us, hey, go out and hire Luke Getsy. He's the guy for the job. Antonio Pierce is the guy for the job. After he told us his entire offseason that I'm not going to request a trade, I want to be with the Raiders, all to eventually request a trade. And I know some people are upset with Davante Adams for that. For me, I get it. It kind of sucks, but let's just be honest. We weren't going to keep Davante Adams past this year anyways. Right, because his contract was way too high, right? Like $44 million would have been the cap hit for us if we kept Davante Adams next year. We're not paying a wide receiver that's 33 years old $44 million, right? And even if you restructure Davante, he's still going to get $44 million. All a restructure means is you're pushing, 15 of that $44 million into future years. You're still paying him 44. It's just a matter of when the cap hits actually hit. And to me, Davante Adams is not worth $44 million next year. Now, for the Jets, they'll potentially get to restructure him if they want. He'll count, I think, about $36 million for them next year. But it's not guaranteed, so they can essentially release him after this season. Or they can restructure him, and a Jets restructure with Davante Adams won't cost him $36 million. Right? He can actually take less money to stay with the Jets next year. So it's a win-win for the Raiders, a win-win for the Jets. I think the Raiders get better by essentially moving a guy that really didn't want to be here. He wasn't going to play for us. I know there was a report last week, where apparently Davante Adams had like a change of heart. Never thought that was going to actually happen, but here we are. Let me know what you guys think, man. What do you guys think about the Raiders officially moving off of Davante Adams? Do you guys think the value is worth it? Because to me, I don't think Davante Adams' value is that high. We have to realize, A.J. Brown in his absolute prime went for 1 first-round pick, which was the 16th overall pick at that time. And A.J. Brown was a lot better at that time than Davante is today, at least in my opinion. Some of you guys may disagree with it. I think A.J. Brown's one of the top 3 or 4 wide receivers in the NFL right now. And I don't personally think Davante Adams is that anymore. Now, I do expect Davante to get to the Jets. He'll have 2-3 weeks where he has maybe a really good 2 to 3 weeks. I suspect that he's going to kind of continue to fall off as we go forward. Right? Davante Adams is not the same guy he was 3 or 4 years ago. Some people are going to disagree with it. That's fine. We'll see what ends up happening over the next 2 years. We'll see if Davante, continues to play at a high level, or if he struggles to separate, if he struggles, to continue to be that wide receiver he was like 4 or 5 years ago. We'll see what ends up happening. But again, I'm excited for the Raiders as we kind of go forward. We have a ton of pieces. I know some people will disagree with it. Wins and losses for the Raiders at this point really just come based off the quarterback play and the offensive coordinator play. Our defense is good, right? I know some people will disagree with it. Our defense is really, really, really good. Our offense has absolutely crushed the defense. I've seen the comments that the defense for the Raiders isn't very good. Look at the points per game. You guys actually watch the game, and I know a lot of people don't actually watch the game. They'll comment without watching the game. But the ones that do watch the game, and I know there's a lot of you guys that do. I know you guys all agree with me that the offense is why the defense is giving up points. All right, this defense, there's some pieces on this defense. You got guys like Adam Butler, and hopefully that cap we have, you spend that money on Adam Butler. We have guys like Adam Butler. We have guys like Malcolm Koonce, who hopefully recovers and is able to really get back to form. Christian and Maxx are under contract for the next couple of years. Brock Bowers is probably the best tight end in the NFL, right? I know statistically, you might say, I don't even know, honestly, statistically, he might actually be the best. But statistically, some people say he might not actually be the best right now. But the thing is, if you guys watch his tape, right, this guy caught a 4-yard pass the other day against this last team that we played. It was a 4-yard pass, and he took it for 18 yards, right? And he got touched like at the 6-yard mark, and he still went another 12 yards. Right, this guy's different, right? Brock Bowers is probably one of the best tight ends in the NFL. You don't need Davante and Brock Bowers, right? You can build around Brock Bowers. We've seen a lot of playoff teams at this point make the switch away from wide receivers and really get to the tight ends. In today's NFL, the way the defense is structured, a lot of the times it's hard to get wide receivers the ball, especially guys that are playing on the outside. We're seeing a lot of too high safeties right nowadays, so with tight ends, it's a lot easier to work with those guys. So, in my opinion, I think the Raiders did the right thing. Let me know what you guys think. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time with another video.